Hey everybody, my name is Ed. Okay, so we're going to do another trade review, and today we have My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies by Ed Brubaker and Shaun Phillips. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my notes here. Okay, so crime comics have existed on and off throughout comics history, probably reaching their height of mainstream popularity in the 40s and 50s. Comics like True Crime, Crime Does Not Pay, what have you. The creation of the Comics Code Authority in the 50s pretty much killed them off as lawmakers and parents groups and people like that were really concerned about the sort of message that crime and horror comics during the 50s were sending to young people. There have been random detective series and comics that try to imitate popular cop shows of the 70s, other things that are like trying to be the stereotype of the hard-boiled detective, the Mickey Spillane or Sam Spade type detective guys. But and like I said, also 70s cop shows and whatnot. But none of those were as popular as the anthology series, such as Crime Does Not Pay and Crime Success Stories, like I said, back in the 50s. I say, however, over the last 15 to 20 years, crime comics have slowly made a comeback mostly throughout indie comics. Series like Sin City, 100 Bullets. Another modern one would be Thief of Thieves. 100 Bullets really isn't an indie comic. It's published by DC through their Vertical label, but it's a comic book that kind of helped bring the genre back, I would say. Which brings us to Criminal, which is a collection of stories and miniseries, and in this case, a original graphic novel. Crime stories written by Ed Brubaker and drawn by Shaun Phillips. It started at Marvel's creator-owned Icon in print around 2006 and moved to Image. Ed Brubaker has a long career starting out in indie comics doing humor and slice-of-life stories in a comic called Low Life. He got a break with DC doing a Perez one-shot, which ultimately led to working on titles such as Batman and Gotham Central with Greg Rucka. Brubaker moved to Marvel to script X-Men and received even greater critical acclaim on his Captain America series. Ed Brubaker's done other noticeable indie work such as Fatale, Velvet, Fade Out, Kill or Be Killed. Recently, he's been working in Hollywood in an effort to bring some of his creations to screen. He's also working right now on the Stumptown series, another story about a detective, along with Greg Rucka. Shaun Phillips has been in the industry for a number of years. He's probably most known for his run on Wildcats with Joe Casey and his frequent collaborations with Ed Brubaker. The stories in Criminal mostly take place in the same universe. The characters sometimes overlap and sometimes happen to somehow either know each other or somehow be related to each other. It's not really important to know this to read the various trades. The stories can be read on their own in any order, but what's important is the worldview presented we're in. It's not a world of glamorous con men or super criminal masterminds. It's a morally ambiguous world full of petty thieves, backstabbers, and stick-up men. Sometimes the worst of worst get what they deserve. Sometimes the bad guys appear to get away. It's a very different comic than something like, say, Sin City, which is basically this over-the-top, almost caricature of old film noir types. Ed Brubaker's world is definitely one of shadows and back alleys, but it's also one of diners, day jobs, child supports, plea deals, broken people, dreamers who stopped dreaming. Uh, the people in Ed and Shaun stories take to crime in a rather matter-of-fact way. Many of them are desperate and cynical, but they see crime as a means to an end. And the fact that their lifestyle might lead to tragedy is just another fact of life for them. The mood of their stories are dreary, and they kind of encapsulate what what's sometimes called existential despair. Although, of course, the characters in the stories wouldn't necessarily use those words, but they clearly accept their fates. Though there's no scenes as such. Again, there's no scenes of drug lords with yachts. There's no mafia dons with mansions. It's just people struggling to make it day by day. There's no gangsters with gold-plated grills. There's just guys, trying to pay the bills, feed their habits, or pay off their debts. Crime here is presented as a very working class endeavor. Um, the sensitive existential despair is very common in noir and crime stories that criminal is heavily influenced by. It's basically the idea that life may or may not be hopeless, and whatever an individual does may in fact be meaningless. Some variation of "oh, I don't care" or "it just doesn't matter" will sometimes be a character's motivation or justification of why they did or did not do something throughout the series. Okay, so getting back to this specific story, my heroes have always been junkies. It basically concerns a young woman named Ellie who ends up in a drug rehab facility. She's there, but she doesn't really care too much about actually getting clean. And while there, Ellie meets a young man named Skip, and they gradually develop a relationship. And they also gradually start down the road to trouble. And throughout the tale, we learn details of Ellie's past, and we find out about her family's relationship to petty crime, and then her fascination with artists and pop stars who are incidentally drug addicts. Throughout the story, she will like name drop uh, people like David Bowie, Keith Richards, Billie Holiday, and whatnot. Um, on that note, Ellie is pretty much the main character. And speaking of like war and crime stories and things like that, a lot of these stories will have what they call the film noir character, or not the film noir character, the femme fatale character. And the femme fatale is usually this kind of sexually provocative antagonist to the male hero, and she uses her sexuality to manipulate or somehow take advantage, if not the protagonist and other people in the story, to somehow get what she wants. Many times it's revealed that she is a couple steps ahead of the other characters. She's maybe somehow responsible for the main conflict or whatever. And this, like I said, she's a couple steps ahead until the climax where the hero or somebody else figures her out. Ellie doesn't quite fit the stereotype exactly. There's no like MacGuffin that everybody wants that she's trying to get before everybody gets it. There's no, big mystery per se. But, if you squint hard enough and if you take this story as kind of a noir story, you can kind of fit her into you can see traces of that, how she would kind of fit into that archetype. But I would argue that it's done in a much, 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 much more realistic way as opposed to the female criminal masterminds you see in most thrillers. She's really somebody you can actually, she meaning Ellie, is somebody you can imagine actually existing in real life. Um, let's see here. Okay, so now while the so here, getting back to the title of the story, it does touch on the kind of romanticism of drugs and drug addicts in like the arts and in pop culture. It doesn't really seem to make a strong statement on it one way or the other, and it's probably my biggest disappointment I have with it. For a story with the title "My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies," Ed Brubaker really doesn't have much to say about being a junkie or drug addiction. And I'm not saying that I want him to outright condemn drugs. I'm not saying I wanted him to outright endorse them. I'm saying I just thought he'd have something to say or maybe provide more detail or insight as opposed to just kind of saying, yeah, there's people who like to take drugs. I think there's a lot that he could have said or that could be said about why people drink or get high in the first place, or how society looks at people who do these things, or how pop culture may or may not glamorize such behavior, or what have you. I just think he could have said more about that, that sort of lifestyle or that sort of choices or that people make or whatever. Now, the story is very, very solid. I think the craftsmanship here is top notch. It didn't quite blow me away though. It's great for what it is. We get really good characterization with Ellie and Skip, and I say the story is more of a character study rather than a heavy plot-driven potboiler. The main character of Ellie, it would have been easy to make her like this sort of stereotype of the bad girl with a heart of gold, but he kind of avoids that trope. I do think another thing, her sort of lack of regret over lifestyle choices kind of fits in with the series overall, and you're going back to the whole sort of existential despair and whatnot. It's also pretty interesting when we first meet Skip in the rehab. We think he's kind of like the self-assured guy. And he's kind of going to be the guide through what's going on in this environment. But as the story progresses, we see him and Ellie's roles kind of flip. Now, the art in My Heroes Have Always Been Junkie is great. And it's not really flashy. It's like very simple, clear layouts, but they tell the story in a very, very effective way without actually calling attention to themselves. I haven't read any interviews with Shaun Phillips, so I don't know how much photo references he uses, but I imagine he probably uses a lot. Having said that, he does escape the problems that a lot of other artists have in that they make figures look really too stiff or too realistic. The art's believable and realistic, but it still looks like organic comic book art. The panel-to-panel flow is really great. The page-to-page flow is good. It's kinetic enough to work when it comes to like action scenes. But meaning Shaun Phillips, is also very adept at conveying emotion and making conversations seem interesting. The coloring by Jacob Phillips is pretty engaging as well. It has kind of I don't know, a watercolor wash look to it in some places. And it's not completely filled out, everyone, and it gives it its kind of impressionistic look to the comic. And the intense scenes here to be enhance the mood rather than provide a sense of specific space. It's also worth noting that there's no borders in some of the panels, and it gives it this kind of loose, dreamy feel. So just to give you an example of what some of the art looks like, look at this. This came in my copy. I guess this is signed by Brubaker. All right, but just give you here's Ellie on the beach meeting some stranger. It's kind of an interesting sort of framing device. Okay. And then as you can see, like I said, there's no borders, there's no hard line borders or anything like that. And like I said, it really works here. Here we are at the drug rehab. And here's everybody's kind of telling their stories. Here's Ellie kind of out of it. Here's Skip. Okay, and again, you look here, the use of color. It's kind of not always completely filled out. Like I said, it just gives a kind of loose feel to everything here. Interesting flashback where she's listening to her dad's old music and whatnot, and just being really caught up and everything. Again, some great storytelling here where Ellie and Skip kind of sneak out. Solid storytelling here. Billie Holiday. It's Billie Holiday or Bessie Smith. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday. That's what it says. And here we have the bad girl tempting the guy. Huh? Here we are on the road to ruin. Okay. Van Gogh reference. Okay then. Okay, so without giving too much away. Yeah, that's enough without giving too much away. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I say the stories in Criminal Universe, that I would say they're a lot more Elmore Leonard with maybe a touch of Jim Thompson, I guess. Not so much the Mickey Spillane, Dashiell Hammett type of um, approach, for lack of a better word. But yeah, really solidly crafted this particular story. I liked, like I said, it didn't have a grand statement or anything like that, but it was fun. It was interesting, and you get a couple of creators, at the top of their game still. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and you guys have a great day.